Lesson 7.4 Video 1. Now we're going to talk about factoring trinomials where a is not equal to 1. In other words, we're focusing on this again. Now in the past it's been 1, which we would factor normally, but when there's a term there, a number there besides 1, there's a couple ways to do it. We can factor like normal, but it's more of a guess and check process, or we can do the method of factoring by grouping, which we've done in the past. But if you remember, factoring by grouping requires 4 or more terms. So if you look at this example, we have a trinomial that has 3 terms, and then all of a sudden now they have an expression of polynomial with 4 terms. Now how did they get from one to the other? Well, they basically took this negative 13x and replaced it with those 2 terms. Because negative 10x minus 3x does mean the same as negative 13x. But how do they come up with those 2 terms? Well, because there's quite a few different options. We could choose 9 and 4, for example. Why negative 10 and negative 3? Well, we're going to go back to our method of factoring by regular trinomials and saying we're going to look for 2 numbers that have a product and a sum that meet certain criteria. Now the sum is the same. It must be that middle term. Nothing's different there. But the product is different because in the past, when we had a, the front term that's a 1, we would just look at 6 and say, what are factors of 6 that give us 13? Well, the problem there is there are no factors of 6 that come up to be 13. And that's because of the 5. So the product is actually going to be the front term, which used to be a 1, is now a 5, and the last term. So we're looking for 2 numbers that have a product of 30 and a sum of negative 13. And as you can see, the 2 terms they chose are negative 10 and negative 3. Those are our 2 factors. Now again, they're both negative because you need a negative 13. Because negative 10 times negative 3 is a positive 30. So that counts. Otherwise we could have 10 and 3, but again we'd have a positive 13. So they basically replace then, using that information, they take these 2 numbers and replace it in the middle instead of having negative 13x, and then they factor by grouping. So, and that's the process of factoring by grouping. So if we look at our rules here, these are the same. We talked about 4 terms are necessary to do grouping. And as I mentioned, we're looking for 2 numbers, 2 factors that have a product of AC, which means they're multiplying the first and last term, and a sum of B, which is the middle term. So one added change, and that's this piece. Instead of just saying the product of, and then have your last term there. Then we use grouping. And this ends Lesson 7.4, Video 1.